There was a time when a trip to the grocery store meant something more than self-checkout beeps and loyalty app scans. It meant a specific smell in the produce aisle, a specific jingle on the radio, a specific cashier who knew your mom by name. Across Canada, from the row houses of Montreal to the prairie towns of Saskatchewan to the coastlines of British Columbia, certain supermarket chains weren't just places to buy milk and bread. They were part of the weekly rhythm of Canadian life. Some were swallowed up in corporate mergers. Some collapsed under crushing debt. Some simply faded away as shopping habits changed. If you're old enough to remember any of these 10 stores, you already know exactly what we're talking about. Let's take a walk down the frozen food aisle of Canadian memory. For generations of Quebecers, Steinberg's wasn't just a grocery store, it was practically a public institution. Founded in Montreal in 1917 by Ida Steinberg, it grew into the dominant supermarket chain across Quebec and parts of Ontario, at its peak running well over 190 stores. Walking into a Steinberg's meant wide aisles, a genuinely impressive bakery section, and that unmistakable red and white signage glowing over the parking lot. Families did their big weekly shop there on Thursday nights or Saturday mornings, loading up station wagons with everything from fresh Quebec cheese to case lots of Pepsi. Steinberg's was famous for innovation too. It was one of the first Canadian chains to introduce the shopping cart on a wide scale and to experiment with self-service formats decades before it became standard. Kids remember the free balloons at the door, the trading stamp promotions parents saved in little booklets, and the distinct hum of fluorescent lights over the meat counter. But after Sam Steinberg passed away in 1978, a bitter family ownership battle over control of the company slowly bled the chain dry through the 1980s. By 1992, after a botched buyout and mounting debt, Steinberg's closed its doors for good, and its stores were carved up and sold to Provigo, Metro, and others. For an entire generation of Quebecers, no other grocery store ever quite replaced it. If you grew up in Ontario or Atlantic Canada before the 1990s, chances are your family shopped at Dominion. Founded back in 1919, Dominion stores grew into one of the largest supermarket chains in the country, instantly recognizable by its blue and white crown logo above the entrance. Dominion was where a lot of Canadians did their big shop, stocking up on Bix pickles, Dominion brand canned goods, and fresh cuts from a full-service butcher counter. The stores had that classic 1970s and 80s supermarket layout, wide checkout lanes, a customer service booth for cashing checks, and often a small pharmacy counter tucked near the front. Many Canadians remember Dominion for its weekly flyer wars with competitors. The paper flyers that landed in mailboxes promising 2-for-1 specials on ground beef or coffee. Owned for years by the Weston family's conglomerate, Dominion eventually became a victim of corporate consolidation. Through the late 1980s and 1990s, hundreds of Dominion locations across the country were sold off or converted, many becoming A&P or Metro stores, with the final Ontario locations disappearing by the mid-2000s. The Crown logo is gone now, but for millions of Canadians who grew up pushing a cart down its aisles, meeting at Dominion was simply what you said on a Saturday morning. The Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, better known simply as A&P, had deep roots in Canada dating back to the early 1900s, eventually growing into a fixture of Ontario and Quebec grocery shopping. A&P stores had a distinctly clean, almost American diner aesthetic, with their signature red and yellow branding and a reputation for competitive pricing on staples like flour, sugar, and canned vegetables. Many Canadians remember A&P for pioneering some of the earliest supermarket formats in the country, larger stores that combine groceries, produce, and household goods all under one roof at a time when many people still shopped at separate butcher shops and greengrocers. The stores had a particular sound to them too, the rattle of wooden-handled carts on worn linoleum, and a bakery smell that hit you the moment the automatic doors slid open. A&P Canada absorbed several other chains over the decades, including Dominion locations in the 1980s, briefly becoming one of the largest grocery operators in Ontario. But increasing competition from Loblaws and other national players eroded its market share through the 1990s and 2000s. In 2005, Metro Incorporated purchased A&P's Canadian operations entirely, and within a few years the red and yellow A&P banners had vanished from Canadian Street for good, converted into Metro or Food Basics locations. Miracle Food Mart had one of the most memorable names in Canadian grocery history, and it lived up to it with a slightly more discount-focused, no-frills approach than some of its competitors. Operating primarily in Ontario and Quebec from the 1960s through the early 1990s, Miracle Food Mart was owned by the Steinbergs conglomerate for much of its life, and it targeted families looking for lower prices on bulk staples. Shoppers remember the stores as bright, slightly cavernous spaces with wide center aisles stacked high with case lots of canned soup, powdered detergent, and toilet paper. It was the kind of place where moms stretched a tight grocery budget across a large family, and where the weekly flyer, often featuring a cartoon genie mascot, was practically required reading before heading out the door. Miracle Food Mart also became known for early loyalty promotions, including collectible glassware and dish sets that shoppers earned with enough grocery stamps, items that still sit in china cabinets across Ontario today. When Steinberg's collapsed in the early 1990s, Miracle Food Mart locations were folded into the sell-off, with many converting to A&P or simply closing outright. By the mid-1990s, the Miracle Food Mart name had essentially disappeared, leaving behind fond, slightly bargain bin memories for anyone who grew up shopping there. Towers occupied a strange but beloved space in Canadian retail memory, blending a supermarket with a full department store under one enormous roof. Operating largely in Ontario, the prairies, and parts of Atlantic Canada from the 1960s into the 1990s, Tower stores were often anchor tenants in suburban shopping plazas, with a grocery section on one side and clothing, toys, and hardware on the other. For kids, a trip to Towers with a parent meant the grocery run always came with the possibility of a detour to the toy aisle, and many Canadians in their 40s and 50s can still remember begging for a specific action figure or record while mom loaded the cart with milk and bread. The stores had that unmistakable big box hum, wide fluorescent lit aisles, a lunch counter in some larger locations, and often a small in-store bakery near the entrance. Towers was owned by Oshawa Group for much of its existence, and as the retail landscape shifted through the late 1980s, the chain was rebranded into Zellers locations, with the Towers name gradually phased out entirely by the early 1990s. While Zellers itself later became a nostalgic memory of its own, many older Canadians remember Towers as the original, the store that came before, the one with the funny name and the toy aisle at the back. In Ottawa and the Ottawa Valley, few names carry as much grocery nostalgia as Loeb. Founded by the Loeb family in the early 20th century, Loeb grew into the dominant supermarket chain across eastern Ontario and parts of western Quebec, instantly recognizable by its green and white signage. Loeb stores had a distinctly community feel, smaller and more personal than some of the sprawling big city chains, with butchers and produce staff who often knew regular customers by name. Families in Ottawa neighborhoods like Vanier, Orleans, and the Glebe did their weekly shop at the local Loeb, picking up everything from fresh bread to Laura Secord chocolates near the checkout. The company also operated IGA stores under license across the region for decades, blending national branding with a distinctly local touch. Loeb was known for its strong ties to the Ottawa community, sponsoring local hockey teams and running seasonal promotions tied to the Rideau Canal Skateway and the Tulip Festival. As grocery consolidation swept the country through the 1990s and 2000s, Metro gradually absorbed the Lowe banner, with most locations converting to Metro or Food Basic stores by the mid-2000s. For longtime Ottawa residents, though, the Lobe is still how some corner stores get described decades after the sign came down. Nob Hill Farms was Ontario's answer to the American warehouse store concept, and it looked nothing like a typical supermarket. Founded by Steve Stavro in the 1970s, Nob Hill Farms operated massive, no-frills warehouse-style stores across the Greater Toronto Area, famous for their cavernous size, bare concrete floors, and prices that undercut nearly every competitor in town. Shoppers remember pushing oversized carts down aisles stacked to the ceiling with pallets of canned goods, produce sold straight out of wooden crates, and meat counters offering deep discounts on bulk cuts. There was no fancy decor, no soft lighting, just a stripped-down, function-over-form shopping experience that families loved for stretching a grocery budget in the 1970s and 80s. Stavro, who also famously owned the Toronto Maple Leafs, built Nob Hill Farms into a beloved regional institution, and its television commercials featuring the folksy tagline promising the lowest prices in Ontario became instantly recognizable across the GTA. The chain began winding down through the 1990s as larger national grocers and warehouse clubs like Costco entered the Canadian market with even greater scale, and the last Nob Hill Farms locations closed by the early 2000s. For Toronto area shoppers who grew up loading up on bargain groceries there, the warehouse aisles remain a distinct, concrete-floored memory. Out west, few retail names inspire the same wave of nostalgia as Woodward's, and for many Vancouverites, the food floor was the heart of the whole operation. Woodward's began as a department store in 1892, but its basement-level grocery department became a Vancouver institution all its own, famous across British Columbia for one thing above all else: the legendary $1.49 day sales that drew massive crowds downtown once a month. Shoppers remember the food floor's distinct layout, tucked below the main department store levels, with a bakery that turned out fresh bread daily and a deli counter that always had a line. Families would make a whole outing of it, browsing clothing and housewares upstairs before heading down to stock up on groceries, turning a simple errand into something closer to an event. The store had a particular energy on sale days, crowds packed shoulder to shoulder, staff calling out specials over the intercom, and shoppers racing between displays for the best deals. Woodward struggled financially through the 1980s as suburban malls and big-box competitors drew shoppers away from downtown cores, and the company filed for bankruptcy in 1993, closing all of its stores, including the beloved food floor. The original downtown Vancouver building still stands today, redeveloped into housing, but longtime residents still talk about $1.49 day, like it was yesterday. Before the era of massive national chains, much of small-town Canada did its shopping at a red and white store. Operating as a cooperative buying group rather than a single corporate chain, red and white stores were independently owned grocers across Ontario and other provinces who banded together under a shared red and white banner and shared purchasing power, allowing small-town shopkeepers to compete with larger city grocers on price. For rural Canadians, through the mid-20th century and into the 1970s, the local red and white was often the only grocery store in town, a place where the owner knew your family's order by heart and would sometimes deliver groceries by truck to farms outside town limits. The stores had that classic small-town general store feel: wooden shelving, a butcher block counter in the back, and a bell over the door that announced every customer. Kids remember penny candy in jars by the till and the owner keeping a running tab for families during hard months. as larger national supermarket chains expanded their reach through the 1970s and 80s, offering lower prices through massive buying power that small independents simply couldn't match. The red and white cooperative network gradually shrank, with most remaining locations either closing or rebranding independently by the 1990s. For those who grew up in small-town Canada, the red and white sign remains a symbol of a slower, more personal era of grocery shopping. For anyone who grew up in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, or Manitoba before the mid-2010s, Safeway wasn't a foreign import. It was simply the grocery store. Though American-owned, Safeway operated in Western Canada for over 90 years, becoming so deeply embedded in prairie and coastal life that many longtime shoppers never thought of it as anything but a local institution. The stores are known for their bright, wide-open layouts, a strong bakery and deli section, and a Safeway Club Card loyalty program that families relied on for weekly discounts. Saturday mornings across Calgary, Winnipeg, and Vancouver often meant a trip to Safeway, filling carts with staples while kids begged for a treat from the in-store bakery case. Safeway also became a beloved community fixture through sponsorships of minor hockey teams and local food drives, cementing its place as more than just a place to buy groceries. In 2013, Sobeys purchased Safeway's Canadian operations in a deal worth nearly $6 billion. And over the following years, the Safeway banner was gradually phased out across the West, with stores rebranded as Sobeys or Safeway locations quietly closed altogether. By the late 2010s, the familiar red Safeway signage that had defined grocery shopping for entire generations of Western Canadians had all but disappeared from the skyline, leaving behind rows of empty parking lots and a lot of Saturday morning memories.